Masechet Shevuot Daf Mem. We're discussing the Mishnah about modeh b'miksat, when someone claims a certain amount and then the defense says, well, I do owe some of that, but I deny that I owe the rest of it. Then they have to make a vow. We saw that there are two ways of reading this, most of the cases in the Mishnah, between Rav and Shemuel, in order to justify their various opinions about whether the two ma'ah that you need, is that the total from the claim, that's Shemuel, or is that the amount of the denial, that's the opinion of Rav. And in order to read the Mishnah, Rav ends up saying that most of the cases in the Mishnah are talking about something that is monetary value. Like over here, Shtei Chesef means the monetary value of Shtei Chesef, and then he admits to Peruta. Even though that's a different type of metal, nevertheless, this case is patur because it's not sufficient, but it's talking about monetary value. Shemuel, however, reads the cases in the Mishnah as not talking about monetary value, but rather the type of metal. It says, I want you to give me this much silver. And he says, no, I'm only going to give you I only admit to owing you a copper, which is a different type of thing. And that's why he's patur. Okay, so now that we understand there's two ways of reading this Mishnah, we're going to first bring a proof for Rav, which would be a challenge against Shemuel. Teda, Teka Taneh Sefa. In the continuation of the Mishnah, it gives a case, Dinar Zahav li biyadecha, and Lecha biyadi ela dinar kesef utrisit ufundion ufruta chayav. Shakol min matbeya hen. If the claimant comes and says, you have a golden dinar in your hands, that's mine, and you owe it to me. And then the defense says, no, I don't have that. I don't owe you that, but I do owe you a dinar kesef. I don't owe you dinar zahab, but yes, a dinar kesef. So it's modeh b'miksat. Or, I don't owe you a dinar zahab, but I do owe you a trisit. That's a smaller denomination, or funjon, or peruta, all smaller denominations. He is liable because they are all min matbeya, types of coins. So what does this mean? If you say they're talking about monetary value, they're talking about currencies, and so the claimant says, you owe me dinar zahav, however much that's worth. Let's say it's $5,000. And the other one says, no, I only owe you this much. So usually he expresses it in quarters or in dimes. Doesn't matter. The point is, it's the monetary value, and therefore he is admitting to some but rejecting some, and that's why he's liable. But if you think it means, so that's good for Rav. But if you think it means, like Shemuel says, that we're talking about the type of metal, then why would he be liable? The claimant says, you owe me this much gold, and the other guy says, no, I don't owe you any gold. I owe you some silver or some copper. Well, then the claim was for one type of item, and the defense said the admission was a different type of item, and therefore should be patur. So this is a good proof for Rav, challenge to Shemuel. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Beshetano b'dinar matbe'ot, ve'kamashmala de pruta bichlal matbe'a ita. Rabbi Elazar comes to the defense of Shemuel and says that the claim here was not about monetary value of a dinar zahav, but actually was in fact about coins. The claim was dinar matbe'ot, a dinar's worth of coins. The claimant said, you owe me one type of this coin, two types of these coins, three types of that coins. In other words, change for a dinar. He didn't ask for a dinar zahav, but rather change for a dinar, and it should be regarding this type of metal, that type of metal, so then the defense says, well, no, I don't owe you that much, I owe you less. Ve'kamashmalan. What did we learn from here? We learned that a peruta is called a coin, even though it's a very small coin, not worth very much. It is one of the coins, and therefore Rabbi Elazar says we're not talking about monetary value. We're actually talking about an item. I want 13 quarters. Okay, so then it's specifically about quarters. He says, no, I'm going to give you dimes. So because it's a type of coin, therefore one is still liable, even though it's not exactly the same type. I said you owe me these coins, and you said no, not those coins, but some other coins. But they're all within coins. Therefore, they're all within the same category. So we do call it the same category. Even a peruta, you call that a coin. Shakol min matbeya achat. And Rabbi Elazar says, my reading is actually even better than the one that you said, according to Rav, that we're talking about monetary value. No, we're talking about types of coins, because look how the Mishnah says, the reason one is chayav is because they are all mean. They're all a type of coin. It's not about the monetary value, but rather that they're all types of coins. And the claimant said, you owe me coins, these coins. The other one says, no, I do owe you some coins, but not all the coins. And so we're talking about the same thing, but really it's about things, items, not about the monetary value as currency. Verav, so Rav, how will he explain this last line? Shakol min matbeya. He can say shakol din matbeya achat. What is he'll say that the Mishnah means that it all has the same law because it's all currency. Therefore, it has the same law no matter what type of coin it is. The fact that he claimed a dinar zahav and meaning that amount. And the defense said, I owe you some other amount, even though he used a different type of currency. It's all monetary value because all these denominations of currency are of monetary value. So we put them all together, and you can compare dollars and cents. That makes sense. Rabbi Elazar, lema medesefa kishmuel metares, reshana mikishmuel sebirale. Now Rabbi Elazar, he came to the defense of Shemuel, in this case at the end of the Mishnah. So does that mean that Rabbi Elazar follows Shemuel all the way through? And even the earlier cases in the Mishnah, Rabbi Elazar thinks is talking about the type of metal and not monetary value? We say no, not necessarily. La sefa davka de katani shakol min matbei achat v'resha kerav o keshemuel. No, Rabbi Elazar could say the sefa there, I think it means coins, different types of coins, because it says in its explanation, because everything is within the category of coins. So because it gives that explanation, so that seems like a better reading, that it's not talking about the monetary value of coins, but rather coins as an item. Kind of like a collector's item. When you collect coins, it's not about the monetary value that this coin had 1,000 years ago, but rather you're buying the coin for the coin itself. But the Resha, that Rabbi Elazar might follow Rav, might follow Shemuel, because it doesn't have language that requires one to read it this way or that way. So it could be that Rabbi Elazar reads the later case to be the item, but the earlier case he might read like Rav to refer to the monetary value. Tashema dinar zahav zahuv li biyadecha en lecha biyadi ela dinar kesef chayav tamad amar le zahav zahuv hasetama shaveh ka'amar le. This is going to be a proof for Rav from a baraita that teaches that if the claimant says, you owe me a dinar of gold that's made out of gold, you have it in my hand, and the defense says, no, I do owe you a dinar, but it's a silver one, he is liable. The reason here is because he says zahav zahuv, so he's referring to not the monetary value of the coin, but the physical substance of the coin, the type of metal. And so he's saying, you owe me a coin of this type. And then the defense says, no, I do owe you a coin, but of a different type. So therefore, that would, since they're talking about the coins themselves and the types of coins, so all coins are within the category of coins. So even if I say you owe me this type of coin and you say, no, not that type, but a different type, it's within the category, and therefore one is liable for modeh b'miksat. What do we see from here? The reason why we're treating this case as referring to the coin as an item and not to its monetary value is because of the extra word, zahav zahuv. It's not just dinar zahav as a denomination, but dinar zahav specifically. I want the type of coin that's made out of gold. But if you left out that word, then we would assume it's talking about monetary value. And therefore, in our Mishnah, where it doesn't have an extra word like that, we should interpret it as referring to the monetary value, which is Rav's reading, and that's a challenge against Shemuel. Amar Rav Ashi hachikama. Amar, Kol Omer Dinar Zahav, Ke Omer Dinar Zahav Zahuv Dameh. Rav Ashi says, no, I can interpret this baraita in accordance with Shemuel, and it's saying anyone who says Dinar Zahav, it's the same as saying a Dinar Zahav that's specifically made out of gold. That's what he means when he says that, and therefore it's really the same thing, and you cannot make this inference. So Shemuel has an answer. Taneh Rabbi Chia l'sayo'el l'Rav, sela li biyadecha, en lecha biyadi ela sela chaser shetei chesef, chayav, chaser ma'a patur. Finally, Rabbi Chia teaches a braita that supports Rav. If a claimant says, you owe me a sela is 24 ma'ah, and then the defense says, no, I only owe you a sela less 2 kesef, then he is liable. He is liable because the denial is 2 kesef, that's 2 ma'ah, and the Rav says that in order to be liable, the denial has to be at least 2 ma'ah, which it is here. But if he says, I owe you all of that except for 1 ma'ah, patur, because the denial is too little. That 1 ma'ah is less than 2 ma'ahs, and therefore the denial is not sufficient, and that's why he's not liable. Clearly, this supports the opinion of Rav and not the opinion of Shemuel. Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar Shemuel lo shanu ela beta'anat malveh vehoda'at loveh, aval ta'anat malveh ve'ada'at ed echad afilu lo ta'ano ela bifruta chayav. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says in the name of Shemuel that when do we say that there's a requirement that the claim be a certain minimum? According to Shemuel, it's that the claim has to be a minimum of 2 ma'ah in order for there to be a Shevuot of modeh b'miksat. So you have to have a minimum claim in order to prompt a Shevuot. That's only in a case where the malveh makes a claim and the loveh, the borrower, says, I admit to a certain amount. Then you need a minimum claim in order to be liable modeh b'miksat. However, if it's a different case, not modeh b'miksat, not he admitted, but rather with one witness, the malveh, the lender, makes a claim, and then he has one witness along with him. If he had 2 witnesses, then he could just collect. But he only has 1 witness. Then, even if the claim is only for 1 peruta, the other person has to make a vow. That's another rule. Another type of vow is if the claimant has 1 witness is not enough to collect, but it is enough to force the other side to make a vow. And in that case, there's no minimum requirement, even just for 1 peruta of the whole claim. Mai ta'ama, what's the source? Tichtiv lo yakum ayed echad beish lechol avon ulechol chatat. Lechol avon ulechol chatat hu de'enokam, aval kam hu lishbu'a v'tanya. Kol makom sheshanai mechayibin oto mamon, ayed echad mechayevo shevu'a. How do we know this from the pasuk that says, one witness cannot stand up, one person cannot stand up as a witness regarding any sin. So it cannot stand up against a person for any sin. In other words, to say, oh, you are guilty of whatever sin, but although he can't prove that this person sinned, and whatever sin it was, including stealing, so one witness cannot prove that and make him pay, but it is sufficient for something else. What else is it sufficient for? It's sufficient to require the other guy to make a vow. And there's a braita that says, in any case where if you had 2 witnesses, you could extract money, then 1 witness will extract a vow. Now, if you have 2 witnesses, it doesn't matter how much the claim is for. If it's 2 witnesses, it could be 1 cent or $1 million. 2 witnesses will require that person to pay, even if it's just a peruta. And therefore, applying that rule, if you have 1 witness, also, it doesn't matter how much the amount is, whether it's a big amount or even just a peruta, 1 witness with a claim of 1 peruta will require the defendant to have to make a vow. If he doesn't want to make a vow, he can always pay. It's his option. Now that we heard one halacha by Rav Nachman in the name of Shemuel, now we're going to learn another one. V'amar Rav Nachman amar Shemuel, ta'ano chitin usorin, v'hoda lo be'achad mehen chayav. We already saw this statement of Shemuel, that if the claimant says, you owe me wheat and barley, and then the defendant said, no, I don't owe you any wheat, but I do owe you barley, or the other way around, then he is liable to make a vow as modeh b'miksat. This is a chidush because you might have thought that he is agreeing to all of one and denying all of the other. So you can call this a complete denial. And if there's a complete denial, there's a complete denial of seorim, let's say, and a full admission of all the chitim. So it's half full admission, half complete denial, and you don't take a vow in either of those cases. And yet the chidush of Shemuel is that we'll look at the whole thing together, chitin usorin, and he admitted to part of it because he admitted to owing one of them, and that is called modeh b'miksat. Amar lo Rabbi Yitzchak, Yishar, v'chen amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yitzchak says, Yashar kochacha, chazak u'baruch. I agree with that. That's a good halacha. Rabbi Yochanan also agreed with this halacha of Shemuel. Mikral de palig aleh Resh Lakish. Now, when you say Rabbi Yochanan agreed, does that mean that Resh Lakish disagreed? Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish were partners, colleagues, chavrutot. And when you say Rabbi Yochanan agreed, that sounds like not everybody agreed, so maybe Resh Lakish does not agree with that. Ikadam misha hava shahile v'shatikle. Ikadam misha hava shatele v'shatikle. And the answer is not necessarily, although Resh Lakish was present when this halacha was said, and Rabbi Yochanan says, yes, great, Yishad, and Resh Lakish did not say anything because he was silent. He was waiting to see for the speaker to finish. And so Rabbi Yochanan was saying Yishar kochacha, whatever, maybe he was explaining himself, and Resh Lakish just didn't get a chance to say anything. Or another version is that he was drinking something, and since he was drinking, he couldn't speak while he was drinking, and therefore he didn't say anything, not one way or another. And therefore, it's not necessarily true that Resh Lakish disagreed, he just didn't react in any way that we know of. Let's bring a support for the statement of Shemuel. From this, Te'ano chitin v'hoda lo b'se'arin patur. It's from the Mishnah. V'Rabban Gamliel mechayev. If someone claimed wheat and the other guy said, no, I don't owe you wheat, but I do owe you barley, then he is not liable. Rabban Gamliel disagrees. That was in the Mishnah. Rabban Gamliel says, even if the denial is not from the same thing as the claim, one's still liable because he's admitting to something. Now, let's infer from the beginning of this, from Tanakh Kama, Tama de ta'ano chitin v'odalo b'se'arin, ha-chitin v'usorin v'odalo be'achad mehen, chayav. You see that the Mishnah picks specifically a case where he asked for wheat and the defendant said that I admitted barley only. That's where he is not liable to make a vow. But if the case were different and the claim was for both wheat and barley and he admitted one of them, then he would be liable, because if this would also be patur, then the Tanakh Kama should have said a bigger chidush, that not only when the claimant asks for wheat and the other guy says no wheat but I do have barley, not only then patur. If you would think this is also patur, then you should have said this example where he claims both and the denial is regarding one of them, an admission in one of them, that even there patur, then that would be a bigger chidush. But so he doesn't say this case, but only the chitin v'odah b'se'arin. So that would suggest that if he had claimed both of them, then he wouldn't be liable. So that would be a support for the law of Shemuel. And we say, no, it's not necessarily a support. Hu hadin dafilu chitin u'serin nami patur. It could very well be that even according to Tanakh Kama, even if the claimant said, you owe me chitin and seorin, and the defendant said, I do owe you all the chitin that you said, but I don't owe you any seorin, it could be patur because that's not modeh b'miksat. He's admitting, we could treat it as two separate things. He's admitting to all of one claim and denying all of the other claim. And the reason why the Tanakh Kama said this case is, they had the machloket is stated regarding when the claim is wheat only, to show you the far-reaching law of Rabban Gamliel. Because if you would have said, chitin and the claim was chitin and seorin, and then Rabban Gamliel said chayav, I would think that Rabban Gamliel is only saying liable because, like a statement of Shemuel, because the claim was both, and he denied one of the things in it and admitted fully to the other thing in it. And so to teach us the greater chidush of Rabban Gamliel, that even if the claim is only chitin and the defendant says no chitin, only seorim, even there, Rabban Gamliel says that he is liable. So that's why I picked that case, but you cannot infer from the Tanakh Kama, because maybe I picked that case to show us the power of Rabban Gamliel. Let's try another proof. Tashema. Te'ano kelim v'karkaot v'hoda bekelim v'kafar b'karkaot v'kafar bekelim patur. The Mishnah brought another case where the claim is for utensils, movable items, and also land. And the defendant either admitted, yes, I owe you the utensils, but not the land. Or I owe you the land, but not the utensils. In all those cases, one is not liable. The reason is because land is not included in modeh b'miksat. Even if it was all land, he says, you owe me 100 acres of land. And the guy says, no, I only owe you 50. Then there's no vow there because the vow does not apply to land. And therefore, all these cases of land it will not apply to. And regarding in this case where he asked for both of them, kelim and karkaot, and he admits to one but denies the other. So regarding the kelim themselves, either he denied the kelim totally, or 0 of them, or admitted to all the kelim. That was the first kehodah bekelim, or kafar bekelim. But the kelim is either all or nothing in these cases, and not some of the kelim. The fact that he admitted to the land, or the other way around, is insignificant because we ignore the land claim. Hodah b'miksat karkaot patur. Now, if he said, you owe me 100 acres, and the other guy said, no, only 50 acres, also no vow. B'miksat kelim chayav. But if, in the case where he claimed, you owe me vessels and land, and then the defendant says, I owe you some of the vessels. You asked for 100 vessels. No, I only owe you 50 vessels. In that case, that is modeh b'miksat because he is admitting to part of and denying part of the movable items. And so the vow does apply in that case. And the chidush is that since he has to make a vow, modeh b'miksat, for the kelim, while you're at it, we apply the while you're at it rule. So you include in the vow a vow about the land also. If it was just about land, he wouldn't make a vow. But now that he's saying that, now that he's making a vow for the kelim, so he'll have to make for a vow also regarding the land if he denies some or all of the land. Tama de kelim v'karkaot de karka la bat shevuahi. Ha kelim v'chelim dumya de kelim v'karkaot chayav. Now we can infer a proof for Shemuel. The reason why he's patur in the first case is because the claim was for vessels and land does not trigger a vow. But if it were one type of vessel and another type of vessel just means anything movable like wheat and barley, then if it was that case in the similar to what everything else that's here, except instead of land you put 2 different types of movable items, then one would be liable. So that's a proof for Shemuel that if the claim was wheat and barley and the denial was on one of them but not the other, then one would be liable to make a vow. Isn't that a good proof? And the answer is no. Could be, you could read the Mishnah as saying, you don't have to, but you could, as saying that indeed, even if it was 2 different types of vessels that were claimed and the defendant agreed to one but denied completely the other, he would still not make a shevuah modeh b'miksat. V'ha dekatane kelim v'karkaot kamashmalan dechi hodah b'miksat kelim chayav af ala karkaot. So why then did the Mishnah choose a case of land? Because you could have given a bigger chidush regarding kelim and kelim, and the answer is to teach you that if he admits to part of the vessels, then he's going to have a while you're at it vow to include whatever he's denying about the land as well. So that's why I taught that, but we cannot find a proof over here for Shemuel. Now, my kamashmalan zokekin. Now, what are you telling me? What are we learning from this Mishnah? The while you're at it rule, that zokekin, since you have to give a vow anyway, so we bind another claim that he had together with the oath, and he has to vow for both. We know that already. Tanena zokekin ad nechasim sheyeshem acharut ishaba alehen. It's a Mishnah in Masechet Kiddushin that says we bind property that can be used as a guarantee, meaning land, to the other vow that he's making already, and the vow will apply now to the land as well. We know that from Masechet Kiddushin, so we don't need this Mishnah to teach us that. And the answer to that is ha'ikad hahi agav gerada nasba. Actually, this Mishnah here in Masechet Shevuot is the main primary place where we teach this law. The one in Masechet Kiddushin doesn't really belong there. It was just brought as a tangent incidentally, so it was going from one topic to another, so it happened to bring that in. But you could ask over there why. Here we need it because this is the main place, the primary place where it's taught, and over there it just happened to come up. So there's no problem with that. Now we have in the name Rabbi Chia bar Abba, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, says the opposite law of Shemuel and the opposite of even what Rabbi Yochanan said before. And according to this view, if the claim was for wheat and barley, and the defendant admitted to one of them and denied the other, he is not liable to say a vow, because he admitted to all of the wheat and he denied all of the barley. So imagine if it was two separate cases. So it's a complete admission, and which certainly you don't have to make a vow because you're going to pay that much. And the other one is a complete denial. So there's no vow for a complete denial, and you don't combine the two and say that he admitted to one of the two. Hold on, we said above that Rabbi Yitzchak told Shemuel, I agree with you. And Rabbi Yochanan also agreed with Shemuel that this case is chayav. And the answer is, Amora'en ninhu alibat Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, there's two Amora'im, there's two speakers. These would be the human loudspeakers that would repeat what the Amorah said. So these two versions of what he said, the students there that heard it differently, remembered it differently, although they're both in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. And now we're going to challenge this version of Rabbi Yochanan from the same sources that we used before to try to prove Shemuel. Tashema, Ta'anochitin v'odalo b'sarin patur v'gamliel mechayev. The Mishnah taught that if someone claims chitin and the defendant admits seorin, he's not liable, but Rabban Gamliel says in that case he is liable. Tamad detano chitin v'odalo b'searin, hachitin dosin v'odalo b'echad mehen chayav. We can infer from Tanakama that the only reason he is patur is because the claim was for chitin and the admission was for seorin. But if the claim was for chitin and seorin and he admitted one of them, then it should be liable, and that would be a challenge too against Rabbi Yochanan. And the answer to that is no, it's no challenge. It could very well be that Tanakama would agree with Rabbi Yochanan and say that even if the claim was for chitin and seorin, and the defendant agreed to one but not the other, also would not be liable, like Rabbi Yochanan said. And so why did he pick the case that's more extreme, that's a less of a chidush? Because it wanted to teach us the bigger chidush, not for Tanakama, but for Rabban Gamliel, that even though it's ta'an chitim and hoda only seorim, even so chayav. Tashema ta'anoch kelim v'karkot v'hoda b'kelim v'kafar b'karkot v'kafar b'kelim patur. The Mishnah teaches further that if the claim was for movable items and land, and the admission was for movable items, but he denied all the land, or he admitted all the land but denied all of the movable items, not liable to say to make a vow, because the admission or regarding the land or denial regarding the land is totally disregarded. So we only look at the vessels, and the vessels are either he agreed to all of them or denied all of them. So there's no modeh b'miksat here. If he denied some of the land in that very case, he doesn't have to bring it because the partial denial is only regarding land. And again, no modeh b'miksat regarding land, and he admitted to all of the kelim. But if he disagrees with some of the kelim, denies some of them, then that will trigger a modeh b'miksat because it's for movable items. Ta'ama de kelim v'karkot de karka la b'shevahi. Hai kelim v'kelim dumya de kelim v'karkot chayav. So can we infer from this Mishnah that the reason in the first case that one is patur is because it was vessels and land cannot trigger a modeh b'miksat. But if it was two different types of movable items, in the same manner as the case of kelim and karkaot, then he would be liable to take an oath, and that would be the same as chitin and seorin. And here we infer would be chayav, a challenge to Rabbi Yochanan who said patur. And the answer is no. Hu adin dafilu kelim kelim nami patur. According to this opinion of the Mishnah, even if it was two different types of vessels, that were claimed and he denied one of them, he would not be liable. Like Rabbi Yochanan says, and the reason why the Mishnah chooses a case of kelim and karkaot is to teach me that if he denies some of the kelim, he'll be liable to make a modeh b'miksat Shevuot, and that will bring along also a vow regarding land. Now, why do we need this Mishnah to teach us the law of zokikin? We already know it from the Mishnah in Kiddushin that we bind land to a vow that is already imposed upon a person. And the answer is ha'ikar, hahi agav gerara nasba. No, this Mishnah here in Shevuot is the primary place where we learn that rule, and the one in Kiddushin is just happened to come up incidentally by a tangent, and so that's why indeed we do need this Mishnah here. And now another challenge against Rabbi Yochanan, who said patur from a baraita, iti Rabbi Abba bar Memal Rabbi Chia bar Abba. So Rabbi Abba bar Memal challenged Rabbi Chia bar Abba, who said the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that he would say patur in this case, from a baraita that says Ta'ano shor vehoda lo bese, se vehoda lo beshor patur. Ta'ano beshor vese vehoda lo be'achad mehen hayav. If the claimant said, you owe me an ox, and the defendant says, no, I owe you a sheep, or the other way around, he asked for a sheep, and the defendant says, no, I don't owe you any sheep, but I do owe you an ox, in that case, he does not have to make a vow, modeh b'miksat, because there is two different species. But if the claimant said, you owe me an ox and a sheep, and he says, no, I don't owe you any ox, but I do owe you a sheep, or the other way around, then he is liable. So we see here, this is the same as chitun se'orin is claimed, and one of them is admitted and one denied. And Rabbi Yochanan said patur, but here it says chayav. So to be Chia, but Rabba answered, Amar le, Hamaneh Rabban Gamliel he. Oh, the author of this baraita is Rabban Gamliel. And because Rabban Gamliel says that the claim and the defense don't have to be the same at all. It could be chitin, and the answer is seorim, and he still has to give a vow, as long as he's admitting that he owes something, even if it's from a different species. However, we reject that. If this baraita is authored by Rabban Gamliel, then even in the Resha he should say chayav. When he says you owe me a shor, and the answer is no, I only owe a seh, shouldn't be patur, should be chayav. So it can't be Rabban Gamliel. Ela hamaneh admon he, rather must be admon. If you remember, admon said in the case where the claimant says you owe me jugs of oil, the defendant says, no, I only owe you jugs, just empty jugs, but not oil. Admon said he is liable because he is liable to make a vow, because he's admitting to one of the things. The claim was you owe me jugs and also oil. He admitted, yes, I owe you jugs, but not oil. So that's the same as when he asked for short and seh, but he said, no, I only owe you one or not the other. So that Admon fits with that opinion. And so that's how we can get out of it, that this baraita is only the opinion of Admon. But Rabbi Yochanan says that I follow the other Tanaim, not like Admon. And don't think that I'm just dismissing you with a weak answer. It's like, let that be Admon. But rather, this is a set tradition that was laid out from the mouth of Rabbi Yochanan, who said, who is the author of this? This is Admon, meaning he knew about this, and he knew that this is the opinion of Admon, and that's why this is not a challenge to him. Don't think that I'm just making this up. There's really a tradition that it was from Admon. Amar of Anan Amar Shemuel, Tanochitin v'kadam hodalo b'se'arim, im kema'arim chayav, im itkaven patur. So now, another law, we have a few more laws from Shemuel. If the claimant says, you owe me wheat, and maybe he was continuing, he was going to say, you owe me wheat and barley, but he just got out the words, you owe me wheat, and the defendant quickly jumped in and said, I owe you barley. Now, why did he do that? Could be he did that because he wants to get out of making a vow. If he would allow the plaintiff to finish and say, you owe me wheat and barley, then, and only afterwards, the defendant would say, I do owe you wheat, but I do owe you barley, but not wheat, then he would have to make a vow, according to Shemuel. And he doesn't want to make a vow. So he jumped in the middle before the plaintiff could say that he owes also barley. So what do we do in that case? So it depends. We judge it. If it looks like the defendant was using artifice, jumping in on purpose to get out of a vow, then we say, you have to give a vow. You knew that he was going to say, you owe me wheat and barley, and you're just trying to get out of a vow. No, you can't get out of it that way. But if mitkaven, if he was intending to respond to the claim, and he didn't have ulterior motive, he was just like, no, what do you mean? I of course I owe you this. And he wasn't meaning to use a trick, but he really meant it sincerely. Then it's okay. He does not have to make a vow. Amar Rav Anan Amar Shemuel Te'anoch shete mechatin והודה לו באחת מהן חייב. לפיכך יעשו כלים למה שהן. Rav Anan, the name of Shemuel, also says that if the claimant said, you owe me 2 needles, very insignificant, cheap thing, and the defense says, I do owe you 1 needle, but not the other one, he is liable to make a vow, even though these are very cheap things. We see from here that the pasuk goes out of its way to talk about kelim, to teach me that vessels, any value. When it comes to money, it's called kesef. There has to be of a certain value of 2 ma'ah. But when it comes to vessels, even very, very cheap vessels, if he denies one but admits to the other, he has to make a vow, modeh b'miksat. Amar papa, ta'ano kelim u'piruta. V'hoda b'kelim v'kafa b'piruta patur. Hoda b'piruta v'kafa b'kelim chayav. Rapa teaches 2 laws. The first one is if the claim was, you owe me vessels and also a peruta of money. And the defense said, yes, I do owe you the vessels, but I don't owe you any money, not even the peruta. He is not liable. Whereas if the other way around, if he admitted, yes, I do owe you a peruta, but I don't owe you any vessels, he is liable. Now let's explain the reasoning for this. Chada kerab v'chada keshmuel. Rav Papa, interestingly, is mixing and matching. He's following Rav in the first law and following Shemuel's ruling regarding the second law. Not that they're contradictory, they're 2 different laws. So, chada kerav da'amar kefirat ta'ana shete chesef. The first one follows Rav, because Rav says that the denial has to be of 2 kesef. And in the first case, he admitted to the kelim, but he denied 1 peruta. A denial of 1 peruta, according to Rav, is not sufficient to make a vow. If you followed Shemuel, it would, but according to Rav, not. And so you see, Rav Papa is following Rav in this first ruling. Chada keshmuel damar, ta'anoch itinu sorin v'oda la'och ba'achat mehen chayav. And in the second ruling is following Shemuel, who said that if the claim is for 2 things, chitin and seorim, and the admission is for one and denial of the other, he is liable. And here, the request was for, you owe me kelim and the peruta, 2 different things. He admitted to one, but denied the other one. Well, that's still called modeh b'miksat, according to Shemuel, and for that reason, he is liable. The next law teaches, Maneli biyadecha en lecha biyadi patur. The Mishnah quoted a case saying, if the claimant says, you owe me 100 dinar, and the defendant says, I owe you nothing, he's exempt, because it's not modeh b'miksat, he's denying the entire thing. Simple case. Amar Rav Nachman, umashpi'in oto sheba teset. Rav Nachman says, even though middeoraita, there's no vow here, but we tell the defendant to vow anyway. This is not modeh b'miksat because he's denying the whole thing, but this is a rabbinic vow called Shevuot Eset, an oath of inducement to induce him to admit if indeed he does owe. Why? Why would the rabbis make a new vow on the defendant when he denied everything, and according to Torah law he doesn't have to? Chazaka en adam toveh elim ken yesh lo alav, because we have an assumption that a person doesn't go and make a claim, doesn't open a suit if he has nothing, no actual claim. So if he's coming and making a suit and saying, coming to court, you owe me 100 dinar, then probably there's truth to it. Usually people don't just make up a claim out of the blue. It usually is based on something. That's our experience. And therefore, if he's claiming it, although he has no evidence and no witnesses, But nevertheless, the rabbis say, you know what? Let's induce the defense, because probably and more than likely there is something going on here. So let's make him vow. If he vows, he doesn't have to pay. But let's make him vow so that if indeed he is guilty and does owe money, then he will pay. We ask about that. No, there's a chazakah the other way around also, that the defense doesn't have so much chutzpah to say, no, I don't owe you anything. Generally, people are a little bit embarrassed if someone really does have a claim and says, you owe me $1,000. The person says, no, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't owe you anything. People aren't, there are some people that are going to lie like that. But generally, a chazakah, if you want to know most of the time, if someone says, I don't owe you, then they don't owe. So therefore, he should not have to make a vow. So that goes against this chazakah. And the answer is, Ish tamutehu deka mishtamet le, sabar adahava li ufara'na le. No, actually, people will deny that they owe anything because they don't think they're actually lying. They're justifying it to themselves. You know what? Listen, I don't have the money right now, but I will avoid paying now, and then when I have money later, then I'll repay him. So in their minds, they're saying, "No, I don't owe you anything, right? Just leave me alone for now." And they justify doing that. And that's why the rabbis say, because generally people are not going to make a claim if they don't really have money owed to them. And generally people will lie and say that they don't owe anything, not because they're going to steal, but rather because they're going to pay later. Therefore, given those two facts, the rabbis impose a vow on the defense to make a vow so that they won't justify. If they're going to make a vow, then they're not going to lie about it, and then they'll admit, I do owe, and then they could say, okay, I need a little more time, can I have more time, whatever, if they don't have the money right now. But at least we're making sure that he's not denying it outright, which would be a lie. Teda, damar Rav Idi bar Ravin amar Rav Chisda, hakofer b'milveh kasher le'edut, pikadon pasul le'edut. And the proof for this is the law of Rav Idi bar Ravin, the name of Rav Chisda, who says that if someone denies a loan, even though he lied about it, he is still valid to be a kosher witness, because in his mind he justified it. He wasn't actually stealing. In his mind there was a white lie just to push it off to later, and when he gets next month's paycheck, then he'll be able to pay it. So he doesn't really mean, I don't owe you. He's saying, I don't owe you, just to push it off. But he's not really a thief. Whereas if someone denies that he has an item that he's supposed to be watching, someone gives him a deposit, watches for me, and he says, no, I don't have it, that's outright stealing. But if you have it, then give it back. What do you mean? You're not biding time because you have the item. So that's an outright thief, and an outright thief cannot be a witness. Whereas someone who's not an outright thief, but he's just stalling for time and saying a small lie, that although that's not allowed, but that would not make someone invalid for being invalid for as a witness, and that is a proof for the reasoning that we just said, that people will make a temporary lie in order to gain time, but you still wouldn't call that person an outright thief. Rav Chaviva matneh asefa. Now that statement of Rav Nachman, Rav Chaviva, instead of saying it on the Resha, the first case, he applies Rav Nachman to the next case. That reads, Maneli biyadecha amar lo hen, lemachar amar lo tenehu li, netativ lecha patur. Someone comes and makes a claim, you owe me 100 dinar. And the defense says, indeed, I do. I admit that I owe it to you. But he's not collecting today. Tomorrow, the claimant comes and says, give it to me now. Now it's payday. I want you to pay me now. And the defense says, I already paid you. Now, it is possible that he paid sometime overnight. So what do we do in this case? Patur, he does not have to make a vow. Not because it is possible that he in fact paid overnight. He should have asked to pay in front of Edim. He didn't ask that, so there's no proof. And he's denying it totally, and therefore there's no bod b'miksat. He doesn't have to pay. Rav Nachman on this case said that we impose on the defense an oath of inducement, because it's kind of suspicious. Just yesterday, you admitted that you owed it to him. Somehow overnight, all of a sudden it got paid before he asked for it on the next day. Because you have a large amount of suspicion, therefore the rabbi saw fit to prompt the defense to make a vow. Now, the opinion that applies Rav Nachman's ruling to the Resha would say, if in this case where there was no admission beforehand that he even owes it, it's just out of the blue, someone says, you owe me $1,000. The other guy says, no, I don't. If you're going to apply a defense, an oath on defense in that case, where there's no reason to think that, well, there's only a small reason to think that defense is lying, the small reason that we said here, maybe he's biding time, then all the more so, he would apply the Shevuot Eset on the latter case where there's a much bigger reason to think that the defense is lying, because they had already admitted to owing this money yesterday. However, the other way around, but if you applied Rav Nachman to only the sefa, in the case where he already admitted the loan that he owes, in that case, yes, it makes sense to impose an oath because he admitted that there is a financial connection between them, that at some point he definitely owed money. But in the first case where there's no financial association, there's some guy came out of the blue, and maybe he owes, maybe he doesn't, but he has no proof at all, and so there's no evidence of any prior financial obligation. So there, we would not impose the oath according to this version. If Rav Nachman said it only on the second case, then we can assume that he would not have applied it to the first case. Baruch Adonai Le'olam, Amen ve'amen.